Have you ever heard of an empire that once ruled almost the whole of Southeast Asia? A mighty kingdom stretching from the island of Java to the Philippines, yet today is veiled by time, nearly erased from our collective memory? Do not drift away, for in the next few minutes you will uncover a wondrous tale of Majapahit, where the ocean once sheltered a golden civilization and then became the very whisper that carried it into oblivion. The world often recalls Rome, Greece, and Egypt, but few know that in the land where the sun rises over the Indonesian archipelago, there once existed an empire no less powerful. It was a realm with a prime minister whose oath echoed through centuries, a radiant culture marked by red brick temples rising from emerald forests, and a trade network stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. Have you ever wondered why great civilizations are forgotten? And could it be that the history we learn at school is only a fragment of a much larger picture? In Majapahit, people believed in the strength of unity, expressed in the saying, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity. Centuries later, those very words became the foundation of a modern nation, Indonesia. Even today, the hashtag Gajah Majapahit on social media has gained tens of millions of views, proving that the memory of this empire has never truly vanished. It simply slumbers, waiting to be awakened. And on this journey, you will see how a young king defeated the Mongols, the army that once brought terror across Asia and Europe, how a legendary prime minister vowed never to taste spices until he had united the islands, and what brought the final sunset, leaving Majapahit only as a distant echo. Do not look away, for the truth of Majapahit will make you see Southeast Asia through entirely new eyes. This is the story of Golden Isles, of people who carried the torch of civilization across stormy seas. This is the story of Majapahit, an empire forgotten, but never dead. And you are hearing it now at Mystic Bedtime Stories, where tales that have traveled through millennia are whispered once more, gently guiding you into sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to imagine. If you had lived in the 14th century, in the heart of the Majapahit Empire, who would you have been? A farmer tending emerald rice fields, a merchant sailing with spices over restless waters, or a warrior following the oath of Gajah Mada? Hold that image close, for now we journey back in time to ancient Java. Close your eyes and imagine stepping onto the shores of Java in the year 1293. The first thing that would strike you is the overwhelming symphony of life itself. The air is thick with humidity, carrying the intoxicating fragrance of frangipani blossoms mixed with the earthy scent of volcanic soil. Ancient trees tower above you like cathedral spires, their canopies so dense that only scattered beams of golden sunlight pierce through to dance on the forest floor below. This is not just any tropical paradise. This is Java, an island blessed by the gods themselves, where the very earth breathes fire through mighty volcanoes, where rivers run like silver ribbons through emerald valleys, and where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds has always been gossamer thin. Listen carefully, and you can hear the distant rumble of Mount Merapi, the mountain of fire, whose periodic eruptions have blessed these lands with the most fertile soil in all of Southeast Asia. The Javanese believe that Merapi is the dwelling place of powerful spirits, and they're not wrong, for it is this volcanic blessing that would make possible the wealth and abundance that built an empire. Picture yourself walking through terraced rice fields that stretch like giant stairs toward the heavens, each level perfectly engineered to capture the monsoon rains and mountain springs. The rice here grows so abundantly that a single harvest can feed a family for an entire year, with surplus enough to trade with distant lands. Local farmers work these fields with a reverence that borders on the sacred, for they understand that this land is truly blessed. But Java is more than fertile fields and volcanic peaks. Along its coasts, natural harbors provide perfect shelter for the great ships that would soon carry Javanese influence across the known world. The island sits perfectly positioned along the ancient trade routes between China and India, like a jewel in the middle of the maritime highway that connects east and west. If you were living in this time, would you choose to be a farmer working these blessed rice paddies, feeling the rich earth between your fingers as you plant the seeds that feed kingdoms? Or would you be drawn to the sea, becoming a sailor ready to brave the monsoon winds and unknown waters in search of adventure and fortune? As you contemplate this choice, remember that both paths would lead to greatness. For Java was about to become the heart of something unprecedented in Southeast Asian history. The island's strategic location made it a natural meeting place for cultures, religions, and peoples from across the known world. Hindu traders from India had been arriving for centuries, bringing with them not just goods, but stories of mighty kings and divine dynasties. Buddhist monks from China shared their wisdom in mountain monasteries, their golden statues gleaming in temple courtyards. Local Javanese shamans practiced ancient rituals that connected them to the spirits of ancestors and the forces of nature itself. In the bustling ports of northern Java, you would have heard a dozen languages spoken daily. Arab merchants haggling over the price of precious spices, Chinese sailors telling tales of their emperor's vast fleet, Indian scholars debating philosophy under banyan trees, and Javanese craftsmen creating works of art that would be treasured from Sumatra to the Philippines. The air in these coastal towns would be perfumed with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, spices so valuable in distant lands that men would risk their lives crossing treacherous seas to obtain them. Local markets overflowed with tropical fruits you've never imagined: golden jackfruit as large as children, dragon fruit with flesh like snow, and durian whose pungent aroma could knock you backward, but whose taste was said to be like eating custard in paradise. But perhaps most remarkable of all were the people themselves. The Javanese had developed a sophisticated understanding of governance, art, and spirituality that blended influences from across Asia into something uniquely their own. They were master builders who could construct temples that seemed to touch the clouds, skilled navigators who could read the stars like books, and brilliant diplomats who could negotiate trade agreements with kingdoms thousands of miles away. Their traditional villages were marvels of community organization, where decisions were made through consensus and every voice mattered. Ancient customs governed everything from planting seasons to wedding ceremonies, creating a social fabric so strong that it could weather any storm. Children grew up learning not just practical skills, but also the epic poems and heroic tales that connected them to a glorious mythological past. Yet beneath this peaceful surface, change was stirring. The old kingdoms that had ruled Java for centuries were growing weak. Their power fragmented among competing nobles and regional chiefs. The great Singasari kingdom, which had dominated eastern Java for decades, was facing its greatest challenge yet, an invasion force from the mighty Mongol Empire, the same force that had conquered China and threatened all of Southeast Asia. It was into this world of beauty and danger, of ancient wisdom and looming crisis, that our story's greatest heroes would soon emerge. The stage was set for events that would reshape not just Java, but the entire maritime world of Southeast Asia. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you how a young prince's desperate gamble would transform this mythical island into the center of an empire that would astonish the world. The golden age of Majapahit is about to begin, and you won't want to miss a single moment of this incredible journey through one of history's most fascinating and forgotten empires. The winds of change are beginning to blow across the Java Sea, carrying with them the seeds of destiny. The year is 1293, and the greatest military machine the world has ever known is sailing toward Java's shores. Kublai Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan and emperor of the Yuan dynasty, has set his sights on conquering the last independent kingdoms of Southeast Asia. His massive fleet carries 20,000 seasoned warriors, veterans of campaigns that have brought the mighty Song dynasty of China to its knees and struck fear into the hearts of kings from Korea to Vietnam. But as these Mongol warships cut through the tropical waters toward Java, they have no idea that they are sailing toward their destiny, not as conquerors, but as unwitting architects of one of the most remarkable empires in human history. In the royal palace of Singasari, the last great Hindu-Buddhist kingdom of eastern Java, King Kertanagara sits in meditation before a golden statue of Buddha. The king is a scholar warrior, a man who has spent his life studying the sacred texts of both Hinduism and Buddhism while also mastering the arts of war and statecraft. He understands that his kingdom faces its greatest test, but he also believes deeply in the power of Dharma, the cosmic law that governs all existence. The Mongols have demanded his submission, as they have demanded submission from every ruler across their vast empire. They have sent envoys bearing the Khan's seal, demanding tribute and acknowledgement of Mongol supremacy. But Kertanagara, in an act of breathtaking defiance that will echo through history, has not merely refused, he has taken the Mongol envoys prisoner and branded their faces as criminals. This act of defiance seals Java's fate. The Mongol war machine, which has crushed every opponent it has ever faced, is now sailing inevitably toward the shores of this tropical paradise. Yet in a quiet corner of the kingdom, a young prince named Raden Wijaya tends to his own meditation garden. Unlike his king, Wijaya does not come from the direct royal lineage. He is what the Javanese call a Menantu, a prince by marriage, having wed the king's daughter. In the rigid hierarchies of Javanese court life, this makes him powerful, but also vulnerable, respected, but not entirely trusted by all the noble families. Wijaya possesses something that will prove far more valuable than pure royal blood: a brilliant strategic mind combined with an almost supernatural ability to read people's hearts and motivations. While others see the approaching Mongol fleet as an unstoppable force of destruction, Wijaya sees something entirely different, an opportunity. But victory was only the beginning. What happened next would truly shock the world. As the Mongol fleet appears on the horizon like a forest of masts and sails, panic spreads through the coastal villages of Java. Fishermen abandon their nets and flee inland, carrying tales of foreign warriors in strange armor, speaking harsh, guttural languages. The very air seems to vibrate with tension as two civilizations, two ways of life, prepare for a collision that will reshape the destiny of Southeast Asia. King Kertanagara, faced with impossible odds, makes a decision that reveals both his courage and his tragic miscalculation of the political forces at work within his own kingdom. Rather than consolidating his forces to face the Mongol threat, he chooses this moment to launch a military expedition against the neighboring kingdom of Malayu in Sumatra, leaving Java's defenses weakened just when they need to be strongest. This decision proves catastrophic. While Kertanagara is away fighting distant battles, his own nobles begin to whisper in palace corridors. Chief among these conspirators is Jayakatwang, the ambitious ruler of Kediri, a regional kingdom that has long chafed under Singasari's dominance. Jayakatwang sees in the approaching chaos an opportunity to settle old scores and claim the throne for himself. Have you ever heard another story of a small, outnumbered force defeating the mighty Mongol Empire? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because what's about to happen in Java might be the most ingenious military strategy ever devised. The night before the Mongol invasion, as their war drums echo across the water like thunder, Raden Wijaya walks alone through his garden. The air is thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, and fireflies dance among the leaves like fallen stars. In this moment of profound peace, surrounded by the beauty that has always defined Java, he makes the decision that will change everything. While King Kertanagara fights his war in Sumatra, Wijaya chooses not to resist the inevitable. Instead, he approaches the Mongol commanders with a proposal so audacious, so perfectly calculated, that it takes their breath away. He offers to become their ally, to guide them to victory against Singasari, and to serve as their vassal ruler over a conquered Java. The Mongol generals, accustomed to fear and resistance, are intrigued by this young prince who speaks to them not as a defeated enemy, but as a potential partner. Wijaya demonstrates his value immediately by providing them with detailed intelligence about Singasari's defenses, the loyalty of various noble families, and the strategic weaknesses that can be exploited. When Kertanagara finally returns from his disastrous Sumatran campaign, he finds his kingdom in ruins. Jayakatwang has seized the capital, declared himself king, and allied with other rebellious nobles. Worse still, the Mongol army, guided by Wijaya's intelligence, has landed successfully and is advancing inland with terrifying efficiency. The final battle of Singasari takes place on a rain-soaked field outside the capital city. King Kertanagara, the scholar warrior who once defied the greatest empire on earth, dies fighting with a sword in one hand and a sacred text in the other, his blood mixing with the mud as his kingdom breathes its last breath around him. Yet in this moment of apparent triumph for the Mongols and their Javanese allies, Raden Wijaya reveals the full genius of his strategy. With Singasari destroyed and its king dead, he turns to his Mongol allies with a new proposal. Help him eliminate Jayakatwang, the usurper who has stolen the throne, and he will ensure their complete control over all of Java. The Mongols, flush with victory and trusting in their new ally, agree readily. They cannot see the trap that Wijaya has spent months preparing, cannot understand the subtle web of loyalties and obligations that bind Javanese society together. They know only that this young prince has proven invaluable in their conquest, and they are eager to complete their mission and return home with news of another victory for the Khan. The campaign against Jayakatwang unfolds exactly as Wijaya has planned. The combined Mongol-Javanese force overwhelms the usurper's defenses, and Jayakatwang dies in battle just as Kertanagara had before him. For a brief, shining moment, it appears that Raden Wijaya has achieved the impossible. He has used the Mongol Empire's own military might to clear away all his rivals and obstacles to power. But the Mongols have gravely underestimated the man they believe to be their faithful vassal. As they prepare to establish permanent garrisons across Java and begin the long process of integrating their new conquest into the Yuan Empire, Wijaya springs his trap with timing so perfect it seems almost supernatural. At a great feast celebrating their joint victory, as Mongol and Javanese warriors drink palm wine and share stories of battle, Wijaya gives a signal that has been planned for weeks. Every Javanese soldier in the hall draws their keris, the sacred wavy daggers that are symbols of Javanese manhood, and in a coordinated strike that lasts less than 5 minutes, they eliminate every Mongol officer in the room. Simultaneously, across the length and breadth of Java, similar scenes unfold. The Mongol army, scattered in small garrisons and confident in their security, finds itself cut off, surrounded, and outnumbered by a population that has suddenly turned hostile. The same local guides who had led them to victory now lead them into carefully prepared ambushes. The same Javanese allies who had fought beside them now hunt them through jungle paths they can never hope to navigate alone. Within a month, the greatest military force in the world has been completely eliminated from Java. Some scattered survivors managed to reach their ships and flee back to China with tales of treachery and disaster. But the vast majority of Kublai Khan's invasion force simply disappears into the tropical landscape of Java, their bones eventually returning to the rich volcanic soil that nurtured the rice fields they had come to conquer. When the dust settles and the last Mongol ship disappears over the horizon, Raden Wijaya stands alone as the undisputed master of Java. He has accomplished something that no other ruler in Southeast Asian history has managed. He has used the Mongol Empire's own power to eliminate his rivals, then turned that same power back on itself with devastating effectiveness. But this victory is only the beginning. What came next would transform this single island into an empire that would astonish the world and leave echoes that resonate to this day. The foundation of Majapahit is about to begin, and the golden age of Southeast Asian civilization is dawning. In the year 1319, 26 years after Raden Wijaya's brilliant triumph over the Mongols, a young man walks through the bustling streets of Trawalan, the magnificent capital city of Majapahit. His name is Gajah Mada, and though he doesn't know it yet, he is destined to become one of the greatest political minds in human history, a man whose vision and determination will unite thousands of islands under a single crown and create an empire that will dominate Southeast Asia for over 2 centuries. But at this moment, Gajah Mada is simply a minor court official, observing the incredible transformation that Wijaya's victory has brought to Java. Where once there were scattered kingdoms constantly warring with each other, there is now a unified realm of unprecedented prosperity and power. The capital city of Trawalan has grown into one of the largest urban centers in the world, with a population approaching 200,000 souls, rivaling London, Paris, and Cairo in its size and magnificence. The city stretches for miles along the banks of the Brantus River, its red brick buildings rising like monuments to human ambition. Grand boulevards wide enough for 20 elephants to walk side by side connect magnificent palaces, towering temples, and bustling marketplaces where goods from across the known world change hands daily. The royal palace complex alone covers over 10 square miles, its courtyards and gardens designed to represent the cosmic order itself, with sacred Mount Meru at its center and the 4 cardinal directions marked by towering gates carved with scenes from Hindu and Buddhist mythology. What strikes visitors most about Trawalan is not just its size, but its incredible diversity. In a single day, you might hear a dozen languages spoken in the markets: Chinese merchants discussing silk prices with local traders, Arab scholars debating theology with Buddhist monks, Tamil craftsmen teaching metalworking techniques to eager Javanese apprentices, and Malay sailors sharing tales of distant islands rich with spices and gold. Do you believe a single human being can truly unite thousands of islands through sheer force of will? As we delve deeper into Gajah Mada's story, you'll discover how one man's impossible dream became the foundation of an empire. Young Gajah Mada, possesses a quality that sets him apart from every other ambitious courtier in the palace. He can see beyond the immediate horizon of Java to envision something that has never existed before. A unified maritime empire stretching across the entire Indonesian archipelago and beyond. While others think in terms of individual kingdoms and local politics, Gajah Mada's mind encompasses a vision of thousands of islands bound together by trade, culture, and a shared sense of destiny. His opportunity comes during a palace crisis that would have destroyed lesser men. In 1328, King Jayanagara, Wijaya's son and heir, faces a rebellion led by a powerful minister named Kuti. The rebellion nearly succeeds, with Kuti's forces actually capturing the royal palace and forcing the king to flee into the countryside. For weeks, it appears that Majapahit might collapse just as Singasari had before it, torn apart by internal rivalries and competing ambitions. But Gajah Mada refuses to accept this fate. Working in secret with a small group of loyal officers, he devises a plan to infiltrate Kuti's stronghold and rescue the kingdom. The plan is audacious in its simplicity. Disguise a strike force as ordinary merchants carrying goods to market, gain access to the rebel-controlled palace, and strike at the heart of the rebellion when they least expect it. The rescue mission unfolds like something from an epic poem. On a moonless night, Gajah Mada leads his disguised warriors through the palace grounds he knows as well as his own home. They move like shadows through courtyards where he once played as a child, past temples where he learned to read the ancient Sanskrit texts, toward the throne room where Kuti sits in Jayanagara's stolen seat. The battle itself lasts less than an hour, but its consequences echo through centuries. Kuti dies with a sword in his hand, still fighting even as his rebellion crumbles around him. King Jayanagara is restored to his throne, and Gajah Mada finds himself elevated to the position of Pati, essentially prime minister of the entire kingdom. But Gajah Mada's greatest moment comes not in the aftermath of this victory, but during the ceremony celebrating his promotion. Standing before the assembled nobles of Majapahit, with the king himself looking on, Gajah Mada makes a declaration that will become known as the Sumpah Palapa, the Palapa Oath, one of the most famous vows in Southeast Asian history. "I will not taste Palapa," he declares, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall, "until I have conquered all of the archipelago for Majapahit." To understand the full audacity of this oath, you must understand what palapa means. It is a spice paste made from chili peppers, salt, and aromatic herbs, one of the most basic and beloved flavors in Javanese cuisine. By vowing to abstain from palapa, Gajah Mada is essentially swearing to give up one of life's fundamental pleasures until he achieves his impossible dream. The assembled nobles listen in stunned silence. Some surely think he has gone mad with ambition. Others perhaps recognize that they are witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in their world, a leader whose vision extends beyond the traditional boundaries of political possibility. Don't click away, because Gajah Mada's story will give you goosebumps as we see how he transforms this impossible oath into reality. What follows is a campaign of expansion unlike anything Southeast Asia has ever seen. But Gajah Mada understands that military conquest alone cannot create a lasting empire. He develops a sophisticated approach that combines military might with diplomatic finesse, economic incentives with cultural integration, and always respect for local customs and traditions. His first major target is the Kingdom of Bali, the neighboring island that has long maintained its independence through a combination of strategic alliances and natural defenses. Rather than simply invading, Gajah Mada begins with diplomacy, sending envoys who speak of the benefits of joining the Majapahit sphere: increased trade opportunities, protection from pirates and hostile neighbors, access to advanced agricultural techniques and engineering knowledge. When some Balinese rulers prove receptive while others remain defiant, Gajah Mada demonstrates the carrot-and-stick approach that will characterize all his future campaigns. Those who join willingly are showered with honors, gifts, and positions of respect within the expanding empire. Those who resist face the full might of Majapahit's military machine, which has been refined and strengthened since the days of Wijaya's triumph over the Mongols. The Balinese campaign concludes with a battle that becomes legendary throughout the archipelago. Facing a combined force of resistant Balinese kingdoms, Gajah Mada employs a strategy that showcases both his military genius and his deep understanding of regional psychology. He stages what appears to be a retreat, drawing the enemy forces into pursuing his army across difficult terrain toward what seems to be a vulnerable position. But the retreat is a carefully orchestrated trap. At the moment when the Balinese forces are most extended and confident of victory, Gajah Mada springs his surprise. Hidden reserves emerge from jungle cover on both flanks, while his retreating main force suddenly turns and charges. The battle becomes a rout, with Balinese resistance collapsing so completely that many historians believe the entire campaign was decided in a single afternoon. Yet even in this moment of total military victory, Gajah Mada demonstrates the political wisdom that sets him apart from mere conquerors. Rather than humiliating the defeated Balinese rulers or destroying their cultural institutions, he incorporates them into Majapahit's governing structure, allowing them to maintain many of their traditional privileges in exchange for loyalty to the empire. This pattern repeats itself across the archipelago over the following decades. The kingdoms of Sumatra, one by one, find themselves faced with Gajah Mada's irresistible combination of diplomatic pressure and military threat. The Sultanate of Palembang, heir to the ancient Srivijaya Empire, attempts to resist but discovers that Majapahit's navy has grown sophisticated enough to challenge their control of the vital Malacca Strait. If measured by today's maps, Majapahit's territory at its peak could rival the European Union in scale and complexity. The conquest of the Malay Peninsula represents perhaps Gajah Mada's greatest strategic triumph. Unlike the island kingdoms that could be isolated and defeated individually, the peninsula's kingdoms have strong overland connections and can potentially call upon allies from Thailand, Burma, and even India. Gajah Mada solves this problem by revolutionizing naval warfare in Southeast Asian waters. Working with Javanese shipbuilders and incorporating design elements learned from Chinese, Arab, and Indian vessels, Majapahit develops a new class of warship specifically designed for the shallow, coral-strewn waters of the archipelago. These ships are larger and more heavily armed than anything previously seen in Southeast Asian waters, but also shallow-drafted enough to navigate river mouths and coastal shallows where traditional deep-water vessels cannot go. The psychological impact of these ships appearing off enemy coastlines proves even more important than their military capabilities. Local rulers, who might have resisted a land-based invasion, find themselves facing an enemy who can strike at any point along their coasts, cutting off trade routes and supply lines at will. By 1350, less than 25 years after making his famous oath, Gajah Mada has achieved the impossible. Majapahit's influence extends from the northern tip of Sumatra to the Aru Islands near New Guinea, from the southern coasts of the Malay Peninsula to the Sulu Archipelago in what is now the southern Philippines. It is an empire that encompasses more than 25,000 islands, hundreds of distinct ethnic groups, and dozens of languages and dialects. Yet perhaps most remarkably, this vast empire functions not as a collection of conquered territories held together by force, but as a sophisticated confederation where local rulers maintain significant autonomy while contributing to a shared prosperity that benefits everyone involved. Trade flourishes as never before, with Majapahit's naval protection allowing merchant vessels to sail safely between markets that were previously cut off from each other by piracy and political instability. The empire's capital, Trawalan, becomes a cosmopolitan center that rivals any city in the medieval world. Its universities attract scholars from across Asia. Its temples showcase architectural innovations that blend influences from India, China, and indigenous Indonesian traditions, and its markets offer goods from as far away as Europe and the eastern coast of Africa. In the soft golden light of dawn, as the first rays of sun filter through the morning mist that rises from the Brantus River, the great temple complex of Trawalan awakens to another day of devotion, learning, and artistic creation. This is not merely a religious center, but the beating heart of a civilization that has achieved something unprecedented in human history. The harmonious blending of multiple great traditions into something entirely new and magnificent. Picture yourself walking through these sacred grounds in the year 1365, at the absolute peak of Majapahit's cultural flowering. The first thing that would strike you is the incredible architectural diversity surrounding you. Hindu temples dedicated to Shiva and Vishnu stand alongside Buddhist stupas containing sacred relics, while traditional Javanese shrines honor the spirits of ancestors and local deities. Yet rather than competing with each other, these different religious traditions seem to complement and enhance one another, creating a spiritual landscape of breathtaking beauty and complexity. The main temple complex, dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva in his form as the cosmic dancer, rises nearly 150 feet into the tropical sky. Its red brick walls are covered with intricate carvings that tell stories spanning thousands of years of human imagination. Scenes from the great Indian epics of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, interwoven with local Javanese legends, Chinese dragons dancing alongside Indonesian Garudas, Buddhist bodhisattvas sharing space with Hindu devas, and traditional Javanese spirits. But what makes these temples truly remarkable is not just their artistic beauty, but their function as living centers of learning and creativity. In the courtyards surrounding the main shrines, you would find scholars from across Asia engaged in debates that span philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, literature, and medicine. Chinese Buddhists discuss the nature of enlightenment with Indian Hindu pandits, while Javanese court poets work on epic compositions that will be performed for kings and commoners alike. If you were invited to attend a Majapahit festival, would you choose to witness the grand procession of the gods, where enormous decorated elephants carry statues through streets lined with thousands of flower petals? Or would you prefer to attend a classical dance performance that tells the story of Prince Rama's quest to rescue Sita, performed by dancers whose movements have been refined over centuries into something approaching divine perfection? The question reveals something profound about Majapahit culture. It offers not just one path to beauty and meaning, but dozens of different ways to experience the sacred and the sublime. This is a civilization that has learned to celebrate diversity as a source of strength rather than division. In the royal workshops adjacent to the temple complex, master craftsmen practice arts that have been passed down through generations while constantly innovating and incorporating new influences. Javanese metalworkers create bronze sculptures that rival anything produced in classical Greece or Rome. Their figures capturing not just physical beauty, but spiritual depth in every line and curve. The famous bronze statue of the dancing Shiva from this period, with its perfect balance of power and grace, will one day be recognized as one of the supreme achievements of world art. Textile workers weave fabrics that incorporate design elements from across the known world. Chinese silk techniques combined with Indian dye methods and traditional Indonesian patterns to create cloth so beautiful that it becomes a diplomatic gift worthy of emperors and sultans. The famous Majapahit batik, with its intricate wax-resist patterns, develops during this period into an art form so sophisticated that a single piece of cloth might take months to complete and be worth more than a farmer's annual income. But perhaps the most remarkable cultural achievement of this era is taking place in the Royal Library, where a court poet named Prapanka is working on a text that will become one of the most important historical documents in Southeast Asian history, the Nagarakretagama. This epic poem, written in the classical Javanese language called Kawi, serves simultaneously as a work of literature, a historical chronicle, and a celebration of Majapahit's achievements. Prapanka's masterpiece describes in loving detail the extent of Majapahit's empire, listing over 350 dependencies and vassal states by name. But more than just a catalogue of conquered territories, the Nagarakretagama reveals the sophisticated political philosophy that underlies Gajah Mada's empire building. It describes a world where diversity is celebrated rather than suppressed, where local traditions are preserved and honored even as they contribute to a larger unity. The poem's most famous passage describes the concept of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity, which will eventually become the national motto of modern Indonesia. But in Prapanka's time, this is more than just a political slogan. It represents a genuine lived reality where people of different religions, ethnicities, and cultural backgrounds work together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Stay with us, because just minutes from now, we'll step onto the spice route, where every major power on Earth was competing for control. The educational system that develops in Majapahit during this period represents another revolutionary innovation. Rather than limiting advanced learning to a narrow elite, the empire creates a network of schools and universities that are accessible to anyone who demonstrates ability and dedication. Buddhist monasteries offer instruction in philosophy, meditation, and the natural sciences. Hindu ashrams teach classical literature, astronomy, and mathematics. Traditional Javanese institutions preserve local knowledge about agriculture, navigation, and traditional medicine. What emerges is a society with one of the highest literacy rates in the medieval world. Even common farmers can often read and write in their local language, while the educated classes are typically fluent in several languages and familiar with the great literary traditions of multiple cultures. This widespread education creates a population capable of participating in complex economic and political activities, helping to explain how Majapahit manages to govern such a vast and diverse empire with relatively little coercion. The religious life of Majapahit during this period defies easy categorization. The royal family and most of the nobility practice what scholars call Hindu Buddhism, a syncretic tradition that incorporates elements of both great Indian religions while maintaining respect for traditional Javanese spiritual practices. Temples often contain shrines to Hindu deities alongside Buddhist images, and religious ceremonies might include Vedic Sanskrit chants, Buddhist sutras, and traditional Javanese prayers to ancestral spirits. Yet this religious complexity never seems to create the kind of sectarian conflict that plagues many other medieval societies. Instead, the different traditions appear to complement each other, with each offering different paths to spiritual fulfillment and social harmony. Hindu concepts of dharma, cosmic law, blend with Buddhist ideals of compassion, while traditional Javanese beliefs about the importance of community harmony provide a practical framework for daily life. The court ceremonies of this period reflect this religious and cultural synthesis in spectacular ways. Royal festivals might last for weeks, featuring processions that include Hindu gods carried on decorated palanquins, Buddhist monks chanting ancient sutras, and traditional Javanese dancers performing stories that blend elements from all three traditions. The king himself participates not just as a political ruler, but as a sacred figure who embodies the harmony between human and divine realms. Music flourishes during this period with the development of the gamelan orchestra into its classical form. These bronze percussion ensembles, with their complex, interlocking rhythms and haunting metallic tones, create soundscapes that seem to transport listeners into transcendent realms. The mathematical precision required to tune and play gamelan music reflects the sophisticated understanding of harmony and proportion that characterizes Majapahit culture at its peak. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals a society of remarkable sophistication and prosperity. The ruins of Trowulan show evidence of advanced urban planning, with sophisticated water management systems that include canals, reservoirs, and public baths. The city's markets were supplied by an agricultural system that could support a population density rivaling modern levels, achieved through intensive rice cultivation, sophisticated irrigation, and the integration of multiple crops in carefully planned rotation systems. The artistic achievements of this period extend far beyond the capital city. Across the empire, local artisans adapt Majapahit styles to their own cultural traditions, creating regional variations that enrich the overall cultural landscape. Balinese sculptors develop their own distinctive approaches to Hindu iconography. Sumatran craftsmen create Islamic calligraphy that incorporates traditional Southeast Asian design elements. Even in distant dependencies, local rulers commission works that reflect both their own cultural heritage and their connection to the greater Majapahit civilization. Perhaps most remarkably, this cultural flowering occurs during a period of active military expansion and political consolidation. Rather than cultural development being sacrificed to military necessity, Majapahit manages to pursue both simultaneously, creating an empire that grows stronger, not just militarily and economically, but culturally and spiritually as well. The legacy of this cultural golden age will outlive the political empire by centuries. The artistic traditions, religious practices, and literary achievements of 14th century Majapahit continue to influence Indonesian culture today, providing a foundation of shared identity that transcends the political boundaries created by later colonial interventions and modern nation-state formation. In the pre-dawn darkness of a bustling harbor in 1375, as the monsoon winds begin their seasonal shift from southwest to northeast, hundreds of ships prepare for journeys that will take them across oceans and between continents. The port of Surabaya, Majapahit's greatest maritime gateway, never truly sleeps. Even in the darkest hours before sunrise, the air thrums with activity. Sailors checking rigging by lamplight, merchants haggling over final cargo manifest details, and harbor masters coordinating the complex dance of vessels arriving and departing on the rhythm of seasonal winds. This is the beating heart of what historians will later call the Maritime Silk Road, the network of sea routes that connected the economies of China, India, the Middle East, and Europe through the strategic waterways of Southeast Asia. And at the center of it all, controlling the vital passages between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, stands the commercial empire of Majapahit. If you've ever heard of the famous Silk Road connecting east and west overland, imagine the spice routes of Majapahit as even more dynamic and profitable. A maritime highway where fortunes were made and lost with every monsoon season. To understand the true scale of Majapahit's commercial dominance, you must first grasp the geography of desire that drove medieval global trade. In the cold climates of northern Europe, a single pound of black pepper was worth more than a laborer's annual wages. Nutmeg and cloves, which grew naturally only in the remote Maluku Islands under Majapahit's control, commanded prices in European markets that made them literally worth more than their weight in gold. But the spice trade represented only one aspect of a commercial network of breathtaking complexity and reach. Chinese porcelain, silk, and tea flowed south through Majapahit ports on their way to Indian and Middle Eastern markets. Indian cotton textiles, precious stones, and steel traveled east and west along routes that Majapahit's navy protected and taxed. Arab merchants brought incense, perfumes, and Islamic manuscripts, while occasionally European traders, still few and far between in this period, arrived with silver, amber, and curious mechanical devices from their distant homeland. The genius of Majapahit's commercial system lay not in simple exploitation or monopoly, but in creating a framework that benefited everyone involved while ensuring that the empire captured its fair share of the resulting prosperity. Rather than simply taxing ships that passed through their waters, Majapahit developed a sophisticated network of commercial partnerships, standardized currencies, and legal frameworks that made trade safer, more predictable, and ultimately more profitable for everyone involved. On TikTok Indonesia today, the hashtag #SharMajapahitTrade has garnered over 30 million views, showing how this ancient commercial empire continues to inspire modern Indonesian entrepreneurs and business leaders. The port city of Surabaya, during this period, would have seemed like something from a fantastical dream to visitors from other parts of the medieval world. Ships from dozens of different kingdoms and cultures crowded its extensive harbor facilities. Chinese junks with their distinctive battened sails and multiple masts, Indian dhows with their triangular lateen rigs, Arab samboks built for speed and cargo capacity, and the increasingly sophisticated vessels of Majapahit's own merchant marine. The city's warehouses, built from the same red brick that characterized all Majapahit architecture, stretched for miles along the waterfront. These were not simple storage facilities, but complex commercial centers that included not just storage space, but also workshops for processing raw materials, residences for foreign merchants, temples and shrines serving multiple religious traditions, and administrative offices where the empire's commercial bureaucracy managed the flow of goods, taxes, and legal disputes. Walking through Surabaya's central market district during the height of trading season would have been an assault on all the senses. The air would be thick with the competing aromas of cinnamon, cardamom, and star anise mixing with the salt tang of the sea and the earthy scent of exotic woods. Merchants would call out prices in a dozen different languages, while customers examined goods that had traveled thousands of miles. Chinese silk, so fine it seemed to flow like water. Indian steel that could hold an edge sharp enough to cut silk. Persian carpets woven with patterns that told stories of distant kingdoms. The sophistication of Majapahit's commercial operations extended far beyond simple buying and selling. The empire developed one of the world's first comprehensive systems of commercial law, with standardized contracts, dispute resolution procedures, and quality control measures that gave merchants confidence to engage in complex, long-term business relationships. Foreign traders, who established permanent operations in Majapahit ports, were granted legal protections and property rights that encouraged them to make substantial investments in facilities and relationships. The empire's monetary system reflected this commercial sophistication. While many medieval societies relied primarily on barter or simple metal currency, Majapahit developed a complex system that included not only traditional gold and silver coins, but also standardized units of valuable spices that could serve as currency in international trade. A ship captain departing from Surabaya might carry payment in Chinese silver, Indian gold, Majapahit bronze coins, and standardized quantities of pepper and nutmeg that were accepted as legal tender in markets from Malacca to Mecca. Perhaps most remarkably, Majapahit managed to maintain this commercial empire through a combination of naval power and diplomatic finesse that avoided the kind of destructive trade wars that plagued other regions. The empire's naval forces were powerful enough to suppress piracy and enforce commercial regulations, but they were deployed in ways that enhanced rather than disrupted trade flows. The typical Majapahit warship of this period was a marvel of naval engineering adapted specifically for the unique conditions of Southeast Asian waters. These vessels needed to be large enough to carry substantial cargo and defensive armaments, but shallow-drafted enough to navigate the coral-strewn waters and tidal estuaries where much of the region's trade took place. They incorporated design elements learned from Chinese, Indian, and Arab shipbuilders, but adapted them to local materials and conditions. The backbone of this naval force consisted of vessels that modern historians call treasure ships, massive multi-hulled craft that could carry both commercial cargo and military personnel. These ships, some of which approached 300 feet in length, were essentially floating commercial centers capable of independent operation for months at a time. They carried not just goods and weapons, but also workshops, temples, administrative offices, and living quarters for the diverse crews required to operate such complex vessels. But Majapahit's commercial success stemmed from more than just naval power and efficient administration. The empire understood something that many other medieval powers missed, that trade flourishes best when it benefits everyone involved rather than simply enriching a single dominant power. Instead of imposing punitive taxes or restricting access to markets, Majapahit worked to expand trade networks and increase the overall volume of commercial activity flowing through their territories. This approach created what modern economists would recognize as a positive-sum game, where the empire's prosperity increased alongside that of its trading partners. Chinese demand for Southeast Asian spices encouraged expanded cultivation in Majapahit territories, creating employment and prosperity for local farmers. Indian textile production increased to meet demand from both Chinese and European markets, accessed through Majapahit commercial networks. Arab and Indian merchants established permanent trading posts and even intermarried with local families, creating communities with strong incentives to maintain peaceful and profitable relationships. The cultural impact of this commercial activity extended far beyond simple economic exchange. The constant flow of people, goods, and ideas through Majapahit ports created one of the most cosmopolitan societies in the medieval world. New agricultural techniques traveled along trade routes, improving food production across the empire. Artistic influences flowed in all directions, enriching local traditions while contributing to broader cultural developments. Religious and philosophical ideas spread through personal contact and scholarly exchange, creating the kind of intellectual ferment that characterized the empire's cultural golden age. Even the physical infrastructure of the empire reflected this commercial dynamism. The famous road system that connected Majapahit's major cities was built not primarily for military purposes, but to facilitate the movement of goods between inland production centers and coastal ports. The empire's sophisticated hydraulic engineering projects, canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems served both agricultural and commercial purposes, enabling the intensive rice cultivation that fed the empire's growing population, while also providing efficient transportation routes for bulk goods. The records that survive from this period reveal a level of commercial sophistication that would not be out of place in the modern global economy. Majapahit merchants used bills of exchange that allowed them to conduct business across vast distances without the risks associated with transporting large quantities of precious metals. Insurance systems protected both merchants and investors against the various risks of maritime commerce. Sophisticated accounting methods allowed for complex partnership arrangements that could span multiple trading seasons and involve participants from dozens of different kingdoms. Yet even as this commercial empire reached unprecedented heights of prosperity and sophistication, the seeds of future challenges were already beginning to sprout. The very success of the spice trade was attracting the attention of more distant powers, including European kingdoms that were just beginning to develop the naval capabilities necessary for direct participation in Asian trade networks. The wealth flowing through Majapahit's territories was creating internal pressures and rivalries that would test the empire's political cohesion in ways that Gajah Mada's generation could hardly have imagined. But those challenges still lie in the future. For now, in the golden afternoon of Majapahit's commercial dominance, the empire stands as proof that prosperity and power can be built through cooperation and mutual benefit rather than conquest and exploitation. The spice routes that flow through their waters carry more than just goods. They carry the dreams and ambitions of a civilization that has learned to turn diversity into strength and trade into empire. But then, shadows began to fall across this golden realm. Stay with us to discover what could bring down such a mighty empire in just a few generations. The year is 1389, and in the great throne room of Trawalan, an old man sits alone among the symbols of absolute power. Yet he has never felt more powerless in his life. King Hayam Wuruk, the grandson of the legendary Gajah Mada and the ruler who presided over Majapahit's greatest territorial expansion and cultural flowering, faces a crisis that threatens to tear apart everything his ancestors built. The irony is as bitter as it is profound. The very success of Majapahit has created the conditions for its potential destruction. The empire has grown so vast, so wealthy, so complex in its administration and diverse in its population that it may have exceeded the limits of what any medieval government can effectively control. At the height of its power, Majapahit's territory encompasses more than 25,000 islands scattered across nearly 2 million square miles of ocean. Its subjects include dozens of distinct ethnic groups speaking hundreds of different languages and dialects. Its economy depends on trade relationships that span from Europe to China, involving commercial partnerships with dozens of independent kingdoms and city-states. The sheer logistical challenge of governing such an empire would strain even modern governments with advanced communications and transportation technology. What happens when an empire becomes too large to control? You're about to find out, and the answer might surprise you. But the crisis facing Hayam Wuruk goes deeper than simple administrative complexity. At its heart, this is a crisis of succession that reveals fundamental contradictions in Majapahit's political system. The king has no male heirs, only a daughter named Kusumawardhani. In normal circumstances, this might not pose an insurmountable problem. Southeast Asian societies have a long tradition of female rulers, and Majapahit's own founding myths include powerful queens who wielded both temporal and spiritual authority. The complication arises from Kusumawardhani's marriage to Prince Wikramawardhana, a member of the royal family of Majapahit, but from a different branch of the dynasty. This marriage was arranged years earlier as a way to strengthen internal unity by linking different royal lineages. But now, with Hayam Wuruk's death approaching and no clear male heir in the direct line, the marriage has created competing claims to the throne that threaten to split the empire. Some nobles support Kusumawardhani's claim, arguing that as Hayam Wuruk's daughter, she is the legitimate heir regardless of gender. Others rally behind Wikramawardhana, claiming that only a male ruler can command the respect necessary to hold together such a vast and diverse empire. Still, others see in this succession crisis an opportunity to advance their own ambitions or settle old scores with rivals at court. The political maneuvering that unfolds in the final years of Hayam Wuruk's reign reads like something from a Shakespearean tragedy. Ancient noble families that have served the crown for generations suddenly find themselves on opposite sides of an increasingly bitter divide. Regional governors who once competed primarily for royal favor now begin to calculate whether their interests might be better served by semi-independence from central authority. The kingdom's military commanders face particularly difficult choices. The Majapahit army and navy have always been instruments of imperial unity, drawing officers and soldiers from across the empire and serving as a meritocratic ladder for ambitious young men, regardless of their ethnic or geographic origins. But as the succession crisis deepens, military leaders find themselves pressured to choose sides based on personal loyalty, regional interests, or calculations about which faction is most likely to prevail. Perhaps most dangerously, the crisis begins to affect the empire's commercial relationships. Foreign merchants and trading partners who have built their business models around Majapahit's political stability start to hedge their bets. Some begin to negotiate separate agreements with regional governors, effectively treating parts of the empire as independent entities. Others reduce their investments in Majapahit territories while expanding their activities in competing trade centers like Malacca, which is beginning to emerge as a potential rival for control of regional commerce. Do you believe that absolute power inevitably leads to collapse? The story of Majapahit's internal struggles offers some fascinating insights into this eternal question. The succession crisis that erupts after Hayam Wuruk's death in 1389 is known to historians as the Paragreg War, named after the split between the eastern and western parts of Java that becomes the primary axis of conflict. On one side stands Wikramawardhana, now calling himself the rightful king and controlling much of the traditional heartland of Majapahit around Trowalan. On the other side is his own son, Bre Wirabhumi, who has been encouraged by various noble factions to assert his own claim to the throne. The tragic irony of this conflict is that it pits members of the same royal family against each other in a struggle that neither side can truly win. Even if one faction achieves military victory, the cost in terms of destroyed infrastructure, damaged trade relationships, and lost legitimacy will weaken the empire regardless of who sits on the throne. The war itself unfolds over several years in the 1390s, with battles fought not just with swords and spears, but through economic warfare, diplomatic maneuvering, and propaganda campaigns designed to win the loyalty of key regional leaders. Both sides attempt to present themselves as the true heirs to Gajah Mada's legacy, the legitimate protectors of Majapahit's glory, and the rightful guardians of the empire's diverse subjects. Yet the very fact of civil war undermines both claimants' legitimacy. The Majapahit political system has always depended on the assumption that the royal family possesses a kind of divine mandate that places them above the ordinary political conflicts that affect lesser mortals. When members of the royal family engage in open warfare against each other, this assumption collapses, opening space for alternative sources of authority and loyalty. Regional governors who might once have waited passively for central authority to resolve its disputes now find themselves with unprecedented autonomy and influence. Some use this freedom to pursue local development projects and strengthen their own power bases. Others begin to explore relationships with foreign powers that might offer alternatives to continued dependence on whoever eventually emerges victorious from the succession struggle. The Paragreg War finally ends around 1398 with Wikramawardhana's victory, but it is a hollow triumph that leaves the empire fundamentally weakened. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died in the fighting. Entire regions have been devastated by military campaigns that treated local populations as either allies to be rewarded or enemies to be punished. The empire's commercial networks have been disrupted by years of political instability, allowing competing trade centers to capture market share that will prove difficult to recover. Perhaps most importantly, the war has revealed to both subjects and foreign observers that Majapahit is not invulnerable. The aura of inevitability and divine favor that once surrounded the empire has been shattered by the spectacle of royal family members killing each other for the right to rule. This psychological blow proves more damaging in the long run than any of the war's immediate material consequences. The empire that emerges from the Paragreg War is still formidable by any objective measure. It controls vast territories, commands impressive military and naval forces, and continues to play a central role in regional trade networks. But something essential has been lost, a sense of unity of purpose and shared destiny that had made Majapahit more than just another medieval kingdom. The regional governors who supported different sides in the civil war retain much of the autonomy they gained during the conflict. Rather than being reintegrated into a centralized administrative system, they operate increasingly as semi-independent rulers who acknowledge Majapahit's supremacy but pursue their own interests when convenient. This evolution toward feudal decentralization might have been manageable in a static world, but Majapahit faces new challenges that require the kind of coordinated response that such a fragmented system cannot provide. The most ominous of these challenges comes from an unexpected direction: the rise of Islamic kingdoms that are beginning to challenge Majapahit's dominance not through direct military confrontation, but through religious conversion and economic competition. These new powers understand that they cannot match Majapahit's military strength in direct battle, but they recognize that the empire's internal divisions and political weaknesses create opportunities for more subtle forms of influence and pressure. As the 14th century draws to a close, the great empire of Majapahit stands at a crossroads. It remains the dominant power in Southeast Asia, but its dominance is no longer unchallenged or unchallengeable. The seeds of future decline have been planted in the very soil of its greatest triumphs, and the harvest of those seeds will reshape the entire region in ways that no one in 1398 could possibly imagine. The Golden Age is ending, but the story is far from over. What happens next will test whether the institutions and traditions that Gajah Mada built can survive the ultimate challenge, the test of time itself. We've just witnessed together the golden age of the Majapahit Empire, from merchant sails stretching across the spice routes to the magnificent palaces of Trawulan. But as you know, in history, no empire lasts forever. Tonight, we journey into the shadows that began to lengthen across this island paradise. Don't click away, because what caused such a mighty empire to crumble in just a few generations will surprise you. The year was 1389, when King Hayam Wuruk, the last great emperor of Majapahit, passed away in his palace at Trowulan. The monsoon rains had just ended, and the rice terraces of Java glowed golden in the morning sun. But within the royal walls, a different kind of stillness had settled. With Hayam Wuruk's death, an era truly ended. The king who had ruled for 55 years, who had seen his empire stretch from Sumatra to New Guinea, was gone. Even more devastating, Gajah Mada had departed years earlier, taking with him the iron will and brilliant strategy that had forged the empire. The two men who had achieved the miracle of unifying thousands of islands under a single crown were now merely legends whispered in palace corridors and village squares. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the death of these heroes. It was that no one possessed the stature to inherit their immense legacy. The empire they had built was like a vast ship requiring a master navigator, and suddenly there was no one left who truly knew how to read the stars. Prince Wikramawardhana ascended the throne with all the proper ceremonies. The court musicians played their gamelan orchestras, priests offered prayers, and nobles bowed in submission. But beneath this facade of continuity, everyone could sense that something fundamental had changed. The magic was gone. Real power had already begun slipping from royal hands like water through cupped palms. Regional lords who had once traveled to Trowulan with tribute and humble requests now sent empty-handed messengers, if they sent anyone at all. The great vassal states of Sumatra and the eastern islands grew increasingly independent, no longer feeling bound by oaths sworn to kings now dead and buried. Can you imagine watching something magnificent slowly fall apart? An empire that once controlled thousands of islands suddenly became like a great tree whose roots were loosening in the soil. In the outer provinces, local chiefs began minting their own coins, collecting their own taxes, making their own laws. The intricate web of governors and administrators that Gajah Mada had created began to unravel thread by thread. Yet even as political unity crumbled, something far more profound was reshaping the archipelago's destiny. A spiritual revolution was quietly sweeping across the islands, carried not by conquering armies, but by peaceful merchants, learned scholars, and devoted holy men. Islam had arrived, and it moved like morning mist, gentle, pervasive, transformative. Since the 13th century, Muslim traders from Gujarat, Arabia, Persia, and China had been settling in the great port cities. They came not as invaders, but as participants in the ancient rhythm of maritime commerce. They married local women, learned to speak Javanese and Malay, adopted local customs while quietly sharing their own faith. What made this transformation so remarkable was its gentleness. Unlike violent religious conversions elsewhere, Islam in the archipelago flowed like a river, finding its course through existing landscapes. Rather than destroying Hindu-Buddhist temples, Muslim rulers often incorporated them. Rather than burning Sanskrit texts, Islamic scholars translated them. Rather than erasing local traditions, they wove Islamic teachings into the rich tapestry of archipelago culture. Imagine walking through a Javanese village in this era of transition. You might hear the call to prayer floating over rice fields where farmers still made offerings to Dewi Shri, the Hindu goddess of rice. You might see mosques built in architectural styles borrowed from ancient Hindu temples, their minarets rising beside stone stupas. In royal courts, shadow puppet performances told stories from the Ramayana, but framed with Islamic moral teachings about good and evil. This wasn't conquest. It was conversation. A centuries-long dialogue between civilizations that created something entirely new and beautiful. Do you think that sometimes the most powerful changes come not through force, but through patient, loving exchange of ideas. While Majapahit's rulers struggled with succession crises and rebellious provinces, new Islamic kingdoms began emerging across the archipelago like stars in the darkening sky. There was Demak, rising in the rice-rich plains of central Java. Its founder, Raden Pata, embodied the cultural complexity of his age. Son of a Majapahit king and a Chinese Muslim princess, he was living proof that old and new worlds could create something beautiful together. Demak's royal mosque became a masterpiece of Indo-Islamic architecture, its timber construction echoing traditional Javanese techniques, while its mihrab pointed toward distant Mecca. In northern Sumatra, the Sultanate of Aceh transformed from a small pepper trading port into a formidable maritime power. Its rulers didn't merely control local spice routes. They dared to challenge European colonial powers, building fleets that could match Portuguese and Dutch warships. Aceh's capital became a cosmopolitan center where Malay princes debated theology with Arab scholars, where libraries held manuscripts in a dozen languages. On the Malay Peninsula, Malacca had grown into perhaps the most brilliant trading center in Southeast Asia. Its harbor welcomed ships from China and India, from Persia and Arabia, from the furthest reaches of the archipelago. In Malacca's markets, you could buy Chinese porcelain and Indian textiles, Moluccan spices and Javanese batik, European firearms and Middle Eastern perfumes. Each of these new realms was a living story of transformation and hope. They had wise sultans who patronized poets and architects, brave admirals who led expeditions to distant shores. The world was changing, and these kingdoms were both products of that change and agents driving it forward. But back in Trowolan, the heart of the old empire was slowly breaking. As Islamic kingdoms grew stronger, they naturally began challenging the authority of their former overlord. What had once been tribute and protection became competition and conflict. The old unity was fragmenting into a complex mosaic of rival powers. And then, as if fate wanted to accelerate the inevitable collapse, Majapahit plunged into the most devastating civil war in its history, the Parereg War, lasting from 1478 to 1527. The war began with a family quarrel. Two half-brothers, Ranawijaya and Kertabumi, both claimed their father's throne. But this became more than a succession crisis. It was a proxy war between two visions of the archipelago's future. Ranawijaya represented the old guard, supported by Hindu nobles who saw themselves as guardians of traditional Javanese culture. His followers included temple priests, keepers of Sanskrit texts, court artists who had perfected classical dance and music. They fought not just for a king, but for a way of life they feared was slipping away. Kertabumi found backing among Muslim merchant communities and nobles who had embraced Islamic teachings. His supporters included wealthy traders who controlled spice ports, scholars who studied Arabic texts, military commanders who had learned new tactics from Ottoman advisors. For nearly half a century, the Majapahit Empire bled itself white. This wasn't a quick, decisive conflict that might have established new order. Instead, it was a grinding struggle that consumed resources, destroyed infrastructure, and turned neighbor against neighbor across Java. Rice fields that had fed the empire became battlegrounds where farmers feared to plant. Stone roads that had carried trade goods fell into disrepair. Great ports where merchant ships had once waited in long lines grew quiet and overgrown with mangroves. In Trowolan's royal libraries, dust accumulated on manuscripts once consulted daily by scholars. Court workshops where master craftsmen had created bronze sculptures and gold jewelry fell silent as patronage dried up. The very buildings that had housed imperial government began to crumble as warfare prevented regular maintenance. But perhaps most heartbreaking was the slow dissolution of cultural unity that had been Majapahit's greatest achievement. The shared language of court ceremonies, common legal principles, festivals that had brought together people of different faiths, all began to fragment as political authority collapsed. The end, when it finally came, was almost anticlimactic. In 1527, the last king of Majapahit, Brawijaya V, died in his palace. There were no thunderous drums to mark his passing, no grand funeral processions, no chroniclers recording the final words of the last emperor. The Majapahit Empire simply stopped. Magnificent palaces that had once housed thousands of courtiers became homes to vines and tropical birds. Stone terraces where royal elephants had paraded became playgrounds for monkeys. Harbors that had welcomed ships from every corner of the known world now heard only the eternal rhythm of waves against empty piers. It was as if a great symphony that had been playing for centuries suddenly fell silent, leaving only the natural sounds of wind and water and distant calls of fishing boats heading out to sea. But you know what? Sometimes the ending of one story becomes the beginning of hundreds of others. The Majapahit people didn't vanish. They carried their knowledge, skills, and dreams into the new kingdoms rising around them. They became administrators who helped organize Islamic courts, architects who designed great mosques, teachers who preserved classical Javanese literature while adapting it for new audiences. The empire had fallen, but its soul lived on. Like seeds scattered by wind across fertile ground, the essence of Majapahit took root in 1,000 places, growing into new forms while preserving something essential of the old vision. The dream of unity that Gajah Mada had sworn to achieve would survive, transformed but unbroken, in the hearts of people who remembered what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. As moonlight climbs higher in our evening sky, we turn together to discover what traces remain of this magnificent empire and how its spirit continues to whisper through the ruins and legends of Java. The last echoes of the Parareg War have faded into silence, and the final king of Majapahit has been laid to rest beneath the earth of Java. But empires, you see, never truly disappear. Tonight, we become archaeological detectives, following clues scattered across centuries to piece together what remains of one of history's most magnificent civilizations. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to walk through the ruins of a lost world, stay with me, because what we're about to discover might change the way you see the very ground beneath your feet. The morning mist still clings to the rice fields of East Java as we make our way to a place that most travelers have never heard of, Trawalan. To the casual observer, it might seem like any other Javanese village. Farmers tend their crops, children play in dusty courtyards, and elderly women sell vegetables at small roadside markets. But look closer, and you'll begin to see something extraordinary. Here, beneath your feet, lies the buried heart of an empire. Every step you take in Trawalan is a step through layers of history. When farmers plow their fields, their tools strike fragments of Chinese porcelain and Indian glass beads. When children dig holes to play marbles, they uncover pieces of bronze jewelry and stone carvings. When the monsoon rains wash away topsoil, they reveal the foundations of buildings that once housed kings and queens. This is what remains of the great capital that once rivaled Beijing and Delhi in its grandeur. Trawalan, the city that Gajah Mada walked through in triumph, where Hayam Wuruk held court with ambassadors from around the world, where the greatest libraries of Southeast Asia once preserved the wisdom of ages. Archaeological surveys have revealed that medieval Trawalan covered an area of nearly 100 square kilometers, Imagine a city larger than modern Paris, but built not of stone and steel, but of red brick and carved timber, of lotus pools and flowering gardens. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. This wasn't just a palace complex. It was a vast urban center that housed perhaps 200,000 people at its height. But here's what makes your heart ache. Most of it is gone. The tropical climate that nourished this civilization also consumed it. Wood rotted, thatch dissolved, and the jungle gradually reclaimed what humans had built. What we see today are mainly the bones of the empire, the brick foundations, the stone reliefs, the ceramic fragments that were too stubborn to surrender to time. Yet even these fragments tell an incredible story. Do you remember how we talked about Majapahit's role in global trade? The archaeological evidence proves it wasn't just legend. In the fields around Trowelin, archaeologists have found coins from China's Yuan dynasty, glass beads from Venice, brass mirrors from India, and ceramic sherds from Persia. This village in the middle of Java was once more cosmopolitan than most cities today. The most magnificent survivor of Old Trowelin is Bajang Ratu Gate, a red brick structure that rises like a prayer frozen in stone. Built in 1331, it stands 16 meters tall, its surface covered with intricate carvings that seem to dance in the changing light. Local people call it the Gate of the King, and legend says it was built to honor a prince who died young, a reminder that even royal blood cannot escape mortality. Standing before Bajang Ratu at sunset, when the red bricks glow like embers against the darkening sky, you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the sound of gamelan orchestras playing in distant courtyards, the clip-clop of horses carrying royal messages, the laughter of children playing in gardens that no longer exist. But Trowelin is just the beginning. Scattered across East Java like pieces of a vast jigsaw puzzle are dozens of other archaeological sites that once belonged to the Majapahit realm. There's Candi Brahu, a Buddhist temple whose stepped pyramid design shows how Indonesian architects had learned to blend Indian religious concepts with local aesthetic sensibilities. Its weathered stones have witnessed nearly 7 centuries of monsoons, and still they stand, patient as ancient elephants. At Candi Tychus, the mouse temple, archaeologists discovered what might be the most sophisticated water management system in medieval Southeast Asia. This wasn't just a temple, but a complex hydraulic structure that channeled water through a series of pools and channels for ritual purification. The engineering precision rivals anything built in medieval Europe, yet it's decorated with reliefs showing local flora and fauna, lotus flowers, elephants, and the tree of life motifs that appear throughout Javanese art. Then there's the mystery of the Pendopo Agung, the great hall that once stood at the heart of the royal palace. Historical texts describe it as one of the architectural wonders of its age, a timber structure so vast it could accommodate thousands of people for royal ceremonies. Today, only its stone foundations remain, like the outline of a giant's footprint. Archaeologists have been trying to reconstruct what it might have looked like, using clues from traditional Javanese architecture and descriptions in old chronicles. But perhaps the most poignant traces of Majapahit aren't the grand monuments. They're the everyday objects that archaeologists continue to discover. Terracotta oil lamps that once lit humble homes, grinding stones where women prepared spices for family meals, children's toys carved from wood and clay, wedding jewelry worn by brides whose names are lost to history. These artifacts remind us that Majapahit wasn't just about kings and battles. It was about millions of ordinary people living their lives, falling in love, raising children, creating beauty, finding meaning in the rhythms of daily existence. The empire's glory may have been built on military conquest and international commerce, but its soul lived in village workshops where craftsmen perfected their skills, in temple courtyards where children learned to read, in markets where neighbors became friends. One of the most remarkable discoveries in recent years has been a collection of copper plates found buried in a rice field near Troelon. These aren't just archaeological curiosities, they're legal documents, land grants issued by Majapahit kings to temples and nobles. Written in Old Javanese using a script derived from ancient Indian writing systems, they provide invaluable insights into how the empire actually functioned as an administrative system. Reading these documents, and yes, scholars can still read them, is like opening a window into the medieval past. You learn about tax systems and trade regulations, about religious donations and territorial boundaries. You discover that Majapahit had a sophisticated legal system that protected property rights and regulated commercial transactions. You realize that this wasn't just a collection of tribute-paying territories, but a genuine state with institutions and procedures that would be recognizable to any modern government. The copper plates also reveal something else: the incredible diversity of the empire. The documents are written in Old Javanese, but they contain loanwords from Sanskrit, Arabic, and various local languages. They mention Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries, Islamic schools, and traditional ancestor shrines, often in the same text. This was a civilization that had learned to make diversity into strength, that had found ways to honor different traditions while building something unified and lasting. But where do you go to see the artistic soul of Majapahit? The National Museum in Jakarta houses the world's finest collection of Majapahit artifacts, bronze sculptures with faces so lifelike they seem ready to speak, gold jewelry so intricate it makes modern craftsmanship look crude by comparison, ceramic vessels decorated with patterns that blend Javanese, Chinese, and Islamic motifs in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow create perfect harmony. Perhaps the most moving piece in the collection is a small bronze figurine of Ganesha, the elephant-headed Hindu god of wisdom and new beginnings. Only 15 centimeters tall, it was probably a household shrine object, something an ordinary family would have prayed to for protection and prosperity. The craftsmanship is exquisite. Every detail of the elephant trunk, every fold in Ganesha's robes, every petal of the lotus he sits upon has been rendered with loving precision. But what makes this little statue so poignant isn't its artistic quality, it's its survival. Someone made this beautiful object 600 years ago. Someone prayed to it, cared for it, passed it down through their family, and somehow, through all the wars and upheavals that followed, through the fall of empires and the rise of new kingdoms, this little bronze god managed to survive. It's a testament to the enduring power of human devotion, to our need for beauty and meaning that transcends political boundaries. The influence of Majapahit extends far beyond museum collections, though. If you've ever wondered why Indonesian law traditionally recognizes both Islamic and customary legal systems, why Javanese architecture blends so many different cultural influences, why Indonesian literature contains such a rich mixture of Hindu epics and Islamic moral teachings, the answer traces back to the synthesis that Majapahit achieved. Even the language carries traces. Modern Indonesian contains thousands of words borrowed from Old Javanese, Sanskrit, Arabic, and Chinese, linguistic archaeology that reveals the cosmopolitan nature of medieval Southeast Asian civilization. When modern Indonesians use words like Nagara, country, Raja, king, or Bahasa, language. They're speaking in the vocabulary of Majapahit. The empire of Majapahit may have fallen, but it never truly died. It lives on in the faces of children playing in village courtyards, in the hands of craftsmen still using techniques perfected centuries ago, in the dreams of modern Indonesians who look back to their ancestors' achievements for inspiration in building their nation's future. In the pre-dawn darkness of a bustling harbor in 1375, as the monsoon winds begin their seasonal shift from southwest to northeast, hundreds of ships prepare for journeys that will take them across oceans and between continents. The port of Surabaya, Majapahit's greatest maritime gateway, never truly sleeps. Even in the darkest hours before sunrise, the air thrums with activity, sailors checking rigging by lamplight, merchants haggling over final cargo manifest details, and harbor masters coordinating the complex dance of vessels arriving and departing on the rhythm of seasonal winds. This is the beating heart of what historians will later call the Maritime Silk Road, the network of sea routes that connected the economies of China, India, the Middle East, and Europe through the strategic waterways of Southeast Asia. And at the center of it all, controlling the vital passages between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, stands the commercial empire of Majapahit. If you've ever heard of the famous Silk Road connecting east and west overland, imagine the spice routes of Majapahit as even more dynamic and profitable, a maritime highway where fortunes were made and lost with every monsoon season. To understand the true scale of Majapahit's commercial dominance, you must first grasp the geography of desire that drove medieval global trade. In the cold climates of northern Europe, a single pound of black pepper was worth more than a laborer's annual wages. Nutmeg and cloves, which grew naturally only in the remote Maluku Islands under Majapahit's control, commanded prices in European markets that made them literally worth more than their weight in gold. But the spice trade represented only one aspect of a commercial network of breathtaking complexity and reach. Chinese porcelain, silk, and tea flowed south through Majapahit ports on their way to Indian and Middle Eastern markets. Indian cotton textiles, precious stones, and steel traveled east and west along routes that Majapahit's navy protected and taxed. Arab merchants brought incense, perfumes, and Islamic manuscripts, while occasionally European traders, still few and far between in this period, arrived with silver, amber, and curious mechanical devices from their distant homeland. The genius of Majapahit's commercial system lay not in simple exploitation or monopoly, but in creating a framework that benefited everyone involved while ensuring that the empire captured its fair share of the resulting prosperity. Rather than simply taxing ships that passed through their waters, Majapahit developed a sophisticated network of commercial partnerships, standardized currencies, and legal frameworks that made trade safer, more predictable, and ultimately more profitable for everyone involved. On TikTok Indonesia today, the hashtag #SharMajapahitTrade has garnered over 30 million views, showing how this ancient commercial empire continues to inspire modern Indonesian entrepreneurs and business leaders. The port city of Surabaya, during this period, would have seemed like something from a fantastical dream to visitors from other parts of the medieval world. Ships from dozens of different kingdoms and cultures crowded its extensive harbor facilities. Chinese junks with their distinctive battened sails and multiple masts, Indian dhows with their triangular lateen rigs, Arab samboks built for speed and cargo capacity, and the increasingly sophisticated vessels of Majapahit's own merchant marine. The city's warehouses, built from the same red brick that characterized all Majapahit architecture, stretched for miles along the waterfront. These were not simple storage facilities, but complex commercial centers that included not just storage space, but also workshops for processing raw materials, residences for foreign merchants, temples and shrines serving multiple religious traditions, and administrative offices where the empire's commercial bureaucracy managed the flow of goods, taxes, and legal disputes. Walking through Surabaya's central market district during the height of trading season would have been an assault on all the senses. The air would be thick with the competing aromas of cinnamon, cardamom, and star anise mixing with the salt tang of the sea and the earthy scent of exotic woods. Merchants would call out prices in a dozen different languages, while customers examined goods that had traveled thousands of miles. Chinese silk, so fine it seemed to flow like water. Indian steel that could hold an edge sharp enough to cut silk. Persian carpets woven with patterns that told stories of distant kingdoms. The sophistication of Majapahit's commercial operations extended far beyond simple buying and selling. The empire developed one of the world's first comprehensive systems of commercial law, with standardized contracts, dispute resolution procedures, and quality control measures that gave merchants confidence to engage in complex, long-term business relationships. Foreign traders, who established permanent operations in Majapahit ports, were granted legal protections and property rights that encouraged them to make substantial investments in facilities and relationships. The empire's monetary system reflected this commercial sophistication. While many medieval societies relied primarily on barter or simple metal currency, Majapahit developed a complex system that included not only traditional gold and silver coins, but also standardized units of valuable spices that could serve as currency in international trade. A ship captain departing from Surabaya might carry payment in Chinese silver, Indian gold, Majapahit bronze coins, and standardized quantities of pepper and nutmeg that were accepted as legal tender in markets from Malacca to Mecca. Perhaps most remarkably, Majapahit managed to maintain this commercial empire through a combination of naval power and diplomatic finesse that avoided the kind of destructive trade wars that plagued other regions. The empire's naval forces were powerful enough to suppress piracy and enforce commercial regulations, but they were deployed in ways that enhanced rather than disrupted trade flows. The typical Majapahit warship of this period was a marvel of naval engineering adapted specifically for the unique conditions of Southeast Asian waters. These vessels needed to be large enough to carry substantial cargo and defensive armaments, but shallow drafted enough to navigate the coral-strewn waters and tidal estuaries where much of the region's trade took place. They incorporated design elements learned from Chinese, Indian, and Arab shipbuilders, but adapted them to local materials and conditions. The backbone of this naval force consisted of vessels that modern historians call treasure ships, massive multi-hulled craft that could carry both commercial cargo and military personnel. These ships, some of which approached 300 feet in length, were essentially floating commercial centers capable of independent operation for months at a time. They carried not just goods and weapons, but also workshops, temples, administrative offices, and living quarters for the diverse crews required to operate such complex vessels. But Majapahit's commercial success stemmed from more than just naval power and efficient administration. The empire understood something that many other medieval powers missed, that trade flourishes best when it benefits everyone involved rather than simply enriching a single dominant power. Instead of imposing punitive taxes or restricting access to markets, Majapahit worked to expand trade networks and increase the overall volume of commercial activity flowing through their territories. This approach created what modern economists would recognize as a positive-sum game, where the empire's prosperity increased alongside that of its trading partners. Chinese demand for Southeast Asian spices encouraged expanded cultivation in Majapahit territories, creating employment and prosperity for local farmers. Indian textile production increased to meet demand from both Chinese and European markets, accessed through Majapahit commercial networks. Arab and Indian merchants established permanent trading posts and even intermarried with local families, creating communities with strong incentives to maintain peaceful and profitable relationships. The cultural impact of this commercial activity extended far beyond simple economic exchange. The constant flow of people, goods, and ideas through Majapahit ports created one of the most cosmopolitan societies in the medieval world. New agricultural techniques traveled along trade routes, improving food production across the empire. Artistic influences flowed in all directions, enriching local traditions while contributing to broader cultural developments. Religious and philosophical ideas spread through personal contact and scholarly exchange, creating the kind of intellectual ferment that characterized the empire's cultural golden age. Even the physical infrastructure of the empire reflected this commercial dynamism. The famous road system that connected Majapahit's major cities was built not primarily for military purposes, but to facilitate the movement of goods between inland production centers and coastal ports. The empire's sophisticated hydraulic engineering projects, canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems served both agricultural and commercial purposes, enabling the intensive rice cultivation that fed the empire's growing population, while also providing efficient transportation routes for bulk goods. The records that survive from this period reveal a level of commercial sophistication that would not be out of place in the modern global economy. Majapahit merchants used bills of exchange that allowed them to conduct business across vast distances without the risks associated with transporting large quantities of precious metals. Insurance systems protected both merchants and investors against the various risks of maritime commerce. Sophisticated accounting methods allowed for complex partnership arrangements that could span multiple trading seasons and involve participants from dozens of different kingdoms. Yet even as this commercial empire reached unprecedented heights of prosperity and sophistication, the seeds of future challenges were already beginning to sprout. The very success of the spice trade was attracting the attention of more distant powers, including European kingdoms that were just beginning to develop the naval capabilities necessary for direct participation in Asian trade networks. The wealth flowing through Majapahit's territories was creating internal pressures and rivalries that would test the empire's political cohesion in ways that Gajah Mada's generation could hardly have imagined. But those challenges still lie in the future. For now, in the golden afternoon of Majapahit's commercial dominance, the empire stands as proof that prosperity and power can be built through cooperation and mutual benefit rather than conquest and exploitation. The spice routes that flow through their waters carry more than just goods. They carry the dreams and ambitions of a civilization that has learned to turn diversity into strength and trade into empire. But then, shadows began to fall across this golden realm. Stay with us to discover what could bring down such a mighty empire in just a few generations. Here we are, you and I, at the edge of our journey together through the rise and fall and eternal rebirth of the Majapahit Empire. The night air carries the scent of frangipani and salt water, and somewhere in the distance we can hear the gentle rhythm of waves against an Indonesian shore, the same rhythm that has been calling to dreamers and adventurers for over 7 centuries. As our final chapter unfolds, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a beginning. For the story of Majapahit, as we've discovered, is not a tale that concluded in 1527 with the death of the last king. It's a story that continues to write itself in every child who learns that differences can be strengths, in every leader who chooses unity over division, in every dreamer who believes that the impossible is simply something waiting to happen. If you believe that this story deserves to be shared with others, that more people should know about this remarkable empire that proved diversity and unity could dance together in perfect harmony, then stay with me for these final moments. Because what I'm about to share might change how you see not just the past, but the future we're all helping to create. Picture yourself standing on the beach at Tuban, in East Java, where fishing boats still set out before dawn as they have for countless generations. The morning mist is lifting from the water, and you can see the faint outline of other islands on the horizon. Madura, Bali, and beyond them, the thousands of scattered jewels that make up the Indonesian archipelago. This is where Majapahit's story truly began, not in the palace halls of Trowulan, but on these waters. Here, Javanese sailors first learned to read the monsoon winds, to navigate by stars and currents, to build the kind of trust with distant peoples that turns strangers into trading partners and trading partners into family. Standing here at sunrise, you begin to understand something that no history book can fully capture. Majapahit wasn't just a political empire or even a commercial network. It was a way of thinking about the world that recognized no boundaries between land and sea, between local and global, between self and other. The Majapahit worldview understood that we are all islands connected by the same ocean, separate but never truly alone. The fishermen preparing their nets in the pre-dawn darkness are the inheritors of this wisdom. Many of them can trace their families back generations to men who sailed these same waters under Majapahit flags. They carry in their blood and their bones the memory of ancestors who understood that the sea doesn't divide, it connects. That courage doesn't mean conquering others, but rather discovering what you share with them. Watch how these modern sailors prepare for their journey. They check the weather, but they also offer prayers at small shrines that blend Islamic, Hindu, and indigenous traditions. They use GPS technology, but they also read the color of the water and the flight patterns of seabirds. They text messages to their families on smartphones, but they also follow fishing protocols passed down through oral tradition for centuries. In their daily lives, you can see the same synthesis of old and new, local and global, that made Majapahit great. As the sun climbs higher, painting the water in shades of gold and turquoise, other boats begin joining the fishing fleet. Some are heading to nearby waters, others to islands days away. Together, they create a living reminder of the maritime networks that once carried Majapahit's influence across half the world. These aren't just individual fishermen seeking individual profit. They're part of communities, cooperatives, extended families that span multiple islands and support each other through good times and difficult seasons. This is the real legacy of Majapahit, not the conquest or the tribute, but the understanding that prosperity comes through connection, that strength comes through cooperation, that the greatest achievements happen when people choose to build together rather than compete alone. But let's imagine for a moment that we could somehow bring Gajah Mada himself to this beach to see what became of his dream. What would he think of modern Indonesia, with its 270 million people speaking hundreds of languages, practicing dozens of religions, yet somehow united under the red and white flag that echoes the colors of his own banners. I think he would be amazed, first of all, by the scale. His empire at its height controlled perhaps 10 million people across the archipelago. Modern Indonesia includes more than 25 times that number, spread across a territory even larger than his wildest conquests. He unified the islands with war fleets and diplomatic missions. Modern Indonesia holds together through democratic elections, shared institutions, and the kind of cultural synthesis he helped pioneer but could never have fully imagined. But I think he would also recognize something familiar in the challenges Indonesia faces today. How do you balance central authority with regional autonomy? How do you create prosperity that benefits everyone, not just the wealthy elite? How do you honor different traditions while building something unified and strong? These were exactly the questions he grappled with 700 years ago, and they remain among the most important political questions of our time. He might be surprised to learn that his name is now known by Indonesian children who have never set foot in Java, that his story is told in languages he never heard, that his oath to unify the archipelago is remembered not as an ancient curiosity, but as a source of inspiration for people building a modern nation. The impossible dream he swore to achieve didn't die with his empire. It transformed, adapted, found new expressions in each generation. And what about the merchants and craftsmen, the poets and teachers who made Majapahit more than just another medieval kingdom? They too would find echoes of themselves in contemporary Indonesia. The country's film industry tells stories that blend ancient legends with modern concerns, just as Majapahit literature mixed Hindu epics with local folklore. Indonesian musicians create songs that incorporate traditional gamelan instruments with global pop sensibilities, continuing the cultural fusion that flourished in medieval courts. Indonesian entrepreneurs build companies that span the archipelago and beyond, using modern technology to create the same kinds of trading networks that once made Majapahit wealthy. Indonesian diplomats work in international organizations to promote the same values of tolerance and cooperation that Majapahit pioneered in its relations with diverse vassal states. But perhaps most importantly, ordinary Indonesians continue to prove every day that unity in diversity isn't just a beautiful motto, it's a practical way of life. In Indonesian cities, you can find Christian churches next to Islamic mosques, next to Hindu temples, next to traditional ancestor shrines, not because the government mandates it, but because communities have learned to see difference as richness rather than threat. In Indonesian schools, children who represent dozens of ethnic backgrounds learn together in the national language while also studying their own local traditions. In Indonesian workplaces, teams that include people of different religions and regional backgrounds collaborate on projects that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. In Indonesian families created through intermarriage between different ethnic groups, children grow up naturally multilingual and multicultural, embodying the synthesis that Majapahit achieved at the level of an entire empire. None of this means Indonesia is perfect, of course. Like every large, diverse society, it faces ongoing challenges with inequality, corruption, environmental degradation, and occasional ethnic or religious tensions. But what's remarkable is how consistently Indonesians return to Majapahit-era principles when they're looking for solutions to modern problems. The commitment to consensus building over majoritarian rule, the respect for regional autonomy within national unity, the belief that economic development should serve communities rather than just elites. These approaches have their roots in lessons learned centuries ago, and the influence continues to ripple outward. In Malaysia and Singapore, in the Philippines and even Thailand, political leaders and civil society activists study Indonesian approaches to managing diversity. In international forums, Indonesian diplomats often advocate for the kind of multilateral cooperation that respects sovereignty while building shared institutions. A diplomatic philosophy that echoes how Majapahit managed its relationships with vassal states. Academic conferences around the world now feature sessions on the Majapahit model of governance, examining how medieval Southeast Asian political structures might offer alternatives to purely Western approaches to democracy and federalism. Urban planners study how Indonesian cities create space for different religious and cultural communities to coexist while participating in shared civic life. Artists and writers from many countries draw inspiration from Indonesian approaches to cultural synthesis, exploring how traditional and modern, local and global can enhance each other rather than compete. Musicians experiment with combining instruments and techniques from different traditions, following pathways first explored in the courts of Trawalan. But beyond all these institutional and cultural influences, perhaps the most powerful legacy of Majapahit is something harder to measure but easier to feel: the proof that human beings can choose cooperation over conquest, inclusion over exclusion, hope over fear. In our current global moment, when so many societies are struggling with questions about immigration and cultural change, when political movements around the world are promoting division and suspicion of difference, the Majapahit example offers a different vision. It shows that diversity doesn't have to mean conflict, that preserving local traditions doesn't require rejecting global connections, that it's possible to be proudly rooted in particular places while remaining open to wisdom from everywhere. As evening light begins to paint the sky above our beach in shades of rose and gold, the fishing boats that left at dawn are beginning to return. Their holds are full of the day's catch, but they're also carrying something less tangible, but equally valuable: the continuation of a way of life that understands the ocean as a highway rather than a barrier, that sees distant islands as neighbors rather than strangers. The children playing in the sand at the water's edge represent the newest generation of this ongoing story. Some of them will become fishermen like their fathers and grandfathers. Others will become teachers, engineers, artists, entrepreneurs, perhaps even presidents and prime ministers. But all of them are inheriting a legacy that began with Gajah Mada's impossible dream and continues in every choice they make to build bridges instead of walls. This is where our journey together ends, not with conclusions, but with invitations. The story of Majapahit isn't finished because the questions it grappled with are still our questions. How do we create societies that honor both unity and diversity? How do we build prosperity that lifts everyone up? How do we turn our differences into sources of strength rather than division? If this story has moved you, if you believe that more people should know about this remarkable empire that proved the impossible could become possible, then I invite you to share it. Tell someone else about Gajah Mada and his oath, about Hayam Wuruk and the Golden Age, about the red brick gates that still stand in quiet rice fields as monuments to human ambition and achievement. Tell them about Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity, and how those 3 Sanskrit words became the foundation for one of the world's most successful experiments in building harmony across difference. Tell them about the fishing boats that still follow routes first mapped by Majapahit sailors, about the artists who still practice techniques perfected in medieval courts, about the children who still learn that their ancestors achieved something magnificent, and that they can too. Which civilization should we explore next in our bedtime stories? Perhaps the legendary kingdom of Srivijaya, Majapahit's predecessor that controlled the Strait of Malacca, or the mysterious Khmer Empire that built Angkor Wat? Or should we sail across the Pacific to discover the navigation secrets of Polynesian voyagers who found islands in the vastness of the ocean, using nothing but stars and waves and the flight patterns of birds? This is Mystic Bedtime Stories, where history becomes legend and legends become inspiration for the future we're all creating together. Until our next journey through the corridors of time, remember, empires may rise and fall, but the stories we tell about them, the lessons we learn from them, the dreams they inspire in us, these are truly eternal. The whispers of the waves will continue long after our voices fade, carrying forward the memory of an empire that chose to unite rather than divide, to include rather than exclude, to prove that the impossible is simply something that hasn't happened yet. And in that eternal song of the sea, the spirit of Majapahit sails on, waiting to inspire the next generation of dreamers who believe that diversity and unity can dance together in perfect, beautiful harmony.